Hi everyone, I'm Chong Shen, a research engineer at Flower Labs. This is part 2 of our video tutorial series of deploying Flower on Red Hat. Welcome back. Let's go through what we're going to do in this video. So in this video, we are going to deploy SuperNodes in Red Hat OpenShift instances. These complements the deployment of SuperLink in Red Hat OpenShift in the first video. So let's take a look at what we have achieved so far. This is the Red Hat OpenShift cluster from the first video, and I'm just going to log in just to see what we have accomplished. So in the console overview, you can go through the workloads and click on the pods, and you can see over here that we have the SuperLink up and running, and also the SuperExec that's running in the server app with the server app plugin. If you look at the SuperLink logs, you can see that it's really started and it's ready to accept connections from SuperNodes. So let's move to a different cluster and see how we can deploy the SuperNode in the second cluster. To do that, we'll go to a second cluster that I also have access to and log in to with the credentials that I have. Now, in order to connect these two clusters together, and connect the pods that are running within these clusters, we will use the Red Hat Service Interconnect. So this is an operator that you can install from the Red Hat OpenShift console. To do that, you navigate to the Operator Hub link, and you can look for the Service Interconnect name, and it just show up here as the one provided by Red Hat. As you can see, I've already installed it in this cluster and this deployment. So if you don't have that yet, you can also install that and then get it working across your clusters. Once you have this installed, you need to do a couple of things. You need to establish or create sites between your SuperLink cluster and also your SuperNode clusters, so this second cluster. And the reason is because the SuperLink needs a site to accept links and route incoming traffic for running the workloads. And for the SuperNode cluster, it also needs to host the service interconnect site so that it can join the application network and route outgoing requests via the interconnect. So all of this runs on the open source Scupper project, and I'll encourage you to refer to the Scupper documentation if you'd like to learn a bit more about this. I've already set up the sites and connection between the SuperLink cluster and the SuperNode clusters. So from here on, it's all about deploying SuperNode in this OpenShift instance and getting it to work. So the first thing we're going to do is very similar to how we've deployed SuperLink in the first cluster, is to go to our workloads and click on the pods here. And what we're going to do is click on Create Pod, and I'm going to copy a manifest that I have in my reference over here. The most important points to keep in mind is that we have set the namespace where we're going to deploy the SuperNode cluster as this name, Flower SuperNode Cluster 1 Demo. This is the project name that we want to deploy the SuperNode into. I'm using the image from our from our official Docker containers, that's version 1.23. And this DNS name over here is obtained from the service itself, which I will show you shortly. The most important things to highlight over here is that we are going to deploy the SuperNode in an isolation process mode, and we have also configured the same structure of the volumes to make it to work. So let's create this pod, and I'll show you where I got the link to connect to the SuperLink. In order to get that, where you would access is to go to Networking and click on Services, and you look for the Fleet API service. So this is the name of the service which I given to establish the service interconnect. And here you can see that the host name that I use to connect the SuperNode pod and the SuperLink pod is based on this hostname given over here. So once you have that done, you can actually take a look at the pods that we've deployed. And if all things work, you will see that it has actually deployed fine with no errors, which is exactly what we want. And then if you look into the Superlink pod from the first cluster, you can see that this information of a pre-pull message is there, and it's also actively updating, which is a good sign. That means we have now a Superlink pod deployed in the first cluster that's completely separate from the SuperNode pod deployed in the second cluster, and they are communicating over the service interconnect. To complete this deployment, we need to do two more steps. The first is to deploy a service so that the SuperNode is able to push the messages to a super exec that runs the ClientApp plugin. And this enables the actual workloads to be transmitted all the way to the ClientApp process so that it can actually run the ClientApp itself. So similar to what we have done before, we're going to create a pod. I'm going to copy once more a service definition over here. So very similar to the Superlink service. In this case, we have the namespace matching the namespace of the project. And this time around, we are exposing only port 1994 because this is the ClientApp IO API that is required to communicate with the ClientApp process. We'll go ahead and create that. And finally, we will spin up the super exec with the ClientApp plugin. I'm just copying the manifest once more, going to the pods, creating the pods, and then pasting that. You will notice that the structure of this super exec is very similar to the super exec that we ran for the server app. Here we give the name of the super exec ClientApp 1 using the official super exec image as well, version 1.23. We are using the SuperNode service that we have just deployed a short while ago, and we increase the cache volume here as well if you want to run any Hugging Face data sets on your deployment. And we can just create that. We'll give it a couple of seconds, and that should scale up to 1, and then we can take a look at the container, at the pods itself, and look at the logs. And that should run. So let's take a look. This seems to be ready. Click on that. Take a look at the logs, and it's perfect. We have the Flower Super Exec that has also started from in the SuperNode cluster and is connected to the SuperNode itself. So there we have it. We have the infrastructure now deployed with one Superlink in the first cluster and one SuperNode in the second cluster. We're running these components in the isolation process mode so that you can completely isolate the dependencies of the server app process as well as the client app process from the Superlink and SuperNode.